This video is going to take you through this week's work, okay, because as I've explained, I'm unable to have a live lesson this week, so I'm going to talk you through this week's work. So firstly, make sure that you're up to date with WHO, and so that's the funeral blues work. Make sure that you've got that completed first and foremost before you start on to clearances, okay? This is a piece of controlled assessment. This is very important coursework, particularly now in place of exams, so you have to make sure that you are up to date. Then you're going to be looking at these four steps here. So brief biographical paragraph about Seamus Heaney, okay? When I say brief, I mean brief. Keep it brief, keep it relevant, keep it succinct, okay, about Seamus Heaney. We'll look a little bit at biographical information in a few moments' time to give you an idea of what I mean to kind of look for. Keep it relevant to him as a poet, his works, his poetry, things like that, and about his family, okay? And that's important because of what the poem is about, which we will discuss when we get to C. B, what poetic form does Heaney employ? So Heaney, it's a combination of an elegy, like funeral blues, and a sonnet, okay? So an elegy, remembering back to funeral blues, it's a poem written in memory of someone, often around the time of a funeral or something along those lines. A sonnet is typically a love poem, okay? So we can work out then that this is a poem written about someone that Heaney loves and about their dying, so it's in memory of that person. What is the poem about? It is about the death of his mother, okay? And in the poem, Heaney sets up this deathbed scene, and we see this woman as she's taking her dying breaths with her family gathered around her. Okay, it's a very poignant moment for the family. Interpretation of the title. Now notice that this is your interpretation, okay? Your interpretation might be different to mine, okay? And that's fine as long as you're able to back it up. So you might want to do a little bit of research into what clearances actually means. The 7 part is just because this is the 7th poem in a series that Heaney has written, okay? So that's where the 7 comes from. So think about the clearances more. In the video I've recorded annotating the poem, I talk about what clearances means. So we'll have a look at that and see if your interpretation and my interpretation, if there's any sort of correlation between them. Okay. Then you will come to this bit with the PowerPoint. So there is an animation here. So you watch this, and that link will take you to this page here on BBC Bite Size, and you'll be able to watch this video based on Heaney's life. Okay. So you'll get some biographical information from this video as well. This revised bit, it takes you through the poem, it looks at the language, the context, so it gives you a little bit of extra information about that. So if you're really struggling to understand it, please have a look at this revised page here, okay? And then we're going to start to work our way through the PowerPoint, okay? So the rest of us then comes into these PowerPoint bits, which we are going to look at now. This is this PDF here uploaded. So obviously you'll see this page here. We have our poem. Again, we have this link, okay, where you're going to find the video. Here's a little bit of biographical information about Seamus Heaney. So he was born in 1939, County Londonderry, Northern Ireland. He lived in Mossbawn with his mother and father, and he was the eldest of 9 children, okay. One of his younger siblings passed away when he was very young, so his mother and father raised 8 children together. And we can assume that they are the we that is talked about in this poem, and we'll see that when you look at the poem itself. It was published in Heaney's collection known as The Hall Lantern, 1987. His mother had died 3 years before, and it was dedicated to her in memoriam of MKH, Margaret Kathleen Heaney. Okay, the sequence of poems, a series of poems, it sort of details out Heaney's relationship with his mum right through Heaney's life until his mother's death then in 1984. It's a 7th in a sequence of 8, and it begins with his mother's life obviously culminating in her death, and that's obviously where the 7 comes from. If you think of 7 out of 8 coming towards the end then, okay? Thinking of form, structure, rhythm and rhyme. Now I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail because I want you to do a little bit of work yourself. So what is an elegy? Already talked about. What is a sonnet? Already talked about. Why such a tightly controlled form? Okay. So have a think of what a sonnet is. A sonnet is 14 lines, okay, and when you look at my video of the annotations, I talk about octet and sestet. So think about why he chooses a really tightly controlled form. It's a very personal and emotional moment in his life that he is writing about here. So perhaps by using that controlled form, it gives him a sense of control over this moment, and I suppose an element of structure, so he can't get too deep, too emotional into it. He has to sort of plod on through the poem itself, possibly, but I want you to have a think about that yourself. Think about the rhyme then in the poem, and if you're able to come up with a rhyme scheme, come up with a rhyme scheme, okay? Again, if you do your research on this poem on the internet, you will find so much information, okay? Same as with Funeral Blues. Blank sonnet, I do mention this in my annotations video, so I'm not going to go over it today. Seamus is volta, okay, so it's a turning point. Sonnets, are typically separated into two sections. We have an 8-line section, octet. We have the 6-line section, which is a sestet. And where those two meet is called the volta, the turning point. And there's normally a change in tone. You might have a change in language, things like that, okay? But again, I go into that in more detail in the annotations video, so please have a look at that. So, your task is to read the poem. Then you go over it and you look for language techniques first and foremost, okay? So that's your similes, metaphors, hyperbole, anything like that, okay? And in my annotations video, they are marked in blue. And the structural techniques then, they are marked in green, and Jean, caesura, things like that, okay? Highlight, underline, label, whatever you want to do. I've already said there are so many apps out there that enable you to do that. You're looking for something that has a whiteboard function to it, okay? That's what you're sort of searching for in your app store. And then, first and foremost, the main bit, we need to think about why he has used these techniques, okay? It's not enough to just say this is a simile. You need to tell me why it has been used, okay? And when you're talking about it, you need to keep it relevant to the technique, okay? Don't be giving me any, as I've said before in class, don't give me any, it makes sticks in the reader's mind, any of that, okay? It needs to be specific. So, then we're going to get into the poem itself. So, clearances. Why has the word clearance has been used, okay? So, we're thinking of an area that has been cleared for something, you're making way for something along those lines. Number 7, as we've already said, it's the 7th in the 8th, in a series of 8. And how does that link to the themes of relationships and change? Okay, so obviously there's a change, something has been cleared out to make way for something new. So there's a change in the relationship somewhere. Okay, so have a think about that yourselves. Narrative perspective, so it's written in third person. Gives us an idea of the speaker, who is Seamus Heaney, as being an onlooker in this situation, as a passive participant in it, so not necessarily an active participant, which we look at whenever we think of the father and the mother, and how the father talks to the mother in the first few lines of the poem. So he is a passive participant in the poem. Most likely speaker of the poem will probably be Seamus Heaney. Okay, we know it is about his mother, so it most likely is him who is by her bedside. Okay, takes us into the actual poem itself. The he being referenced is the father and the her is the mother. Okay, language technique used here, so there's hyperbole used here, because he is exaggerating the fact that in the last minutes he said more to her almost than all their life together. We are assuming that he has probably said more than the 2 sentences that he is going to say to her. He's probably said more to her, but it's the fact that what he says to her has quite a deep and personal meaning. Okay. This hyperbole, it just shows that the character of the he, this father figure, he's the typical father, doesn't say an awful lot, doesn't get very emotional. He keeps his cards close to his chest, okay, we get that impression from him in this technique, okay, so that's what we're learning about the personality. He's a very closed person, okay, doesn't open up very often. And then we have the direct speech, that's the language technique being used here, and we can see that with the speech marks here. okay? And we get a little glimpse of the intimate relationship, the bond shared between this man and a woman, okay? They've been married for a very long time, and we get that impression from this because this memory to somebody means absolutely nothing, but to them it probably means the world, okay? So it's very intimate. What is New Row here? We have New Row. So this is where Heaney's mother grew up in Castle Dawson. And you'll be in New Row on Monday night and I'll come up for you. So he's going to talk to her. He's reflecting on the past. He's quite reminiscent here in this. And he's just sharing this little moment with his wife. This little memory of the two of them together as a young couple. Presumably if he's coming for her in her childhood home. They were probably courting back in those days. His head was bent down to her propped up head. Okay, so this propped up, this adjective, what does that tell us about Heaney's mother? So we get an impression of how she's sitting in the bed, how she's being held up. We can assume that his mother, sort of typical matriarch of the family, would have held everyone up, but now she herself is being propped up. Okay, so we have a language technique here with repetition of head here, his head and her head, and it just shows the physical intimacy. Okay, so here we have this memory, okay, this reminiscence here, which shows the intimacy and the relationship between the man and the woman. But here we see a more physical relationship, and it's a very close body language as they are leaning into each other. Okay, and it's quite a nice little image. Okay, he's almost holding her. She could not hear, but we were overjoyed. Okay, so she could not hear, presumably because she is so very unwell on her deathbed. Okay, but the fact that he is being so intimate, it's a bit ironic that at the last moments of this woman's life, the father then decides to open up with a more softer and intimate side towards her that he maybe hasn't displayed throughout their relationship. So it's a little bit ironic that she couldn't hear him being intimate about their relationship as a young couple. The way here we can assume is probably the 8 children of Margaret Kathleen Heaney gathered around. And the idea that they're overjoyed, it does seem a little bit strange to be overjoyed. It's such a sad time, you know, they're gathered around their mother's deathbed. But I think that maybe suggests that they were just pleased to see their father open up in his last moment. That maybe they were afraid that if he hadn't opened up, he would regret it. But because he has, they were overjoyed that his mother has got to experience her husband's soft side just one last time before she passes away. Called her good and girl, then she was dead. So we have alliteration here, good, girl. It's also a very short sentence. He called her good and girl, and then we have a short phrase, then she was dead. We have a full stop here in the middle, so we have a little caesura here, just to show this little pause, I suppose, and it just shows maybe that Heaney knows that life is short, it's fleeting, and it just can go in a moment, okay? And it separates out, then she was dead, okay? We're forced to sort of pause after good and girl, then she was dead, so we get this little idea of what they were experiencing at this time. The fact that he calls her good and girl gives us again an idea of their relationship together, how intimate they were, and represent back to them as a young couple with the girl, okay? The structural technique then is the caesura. The conjunction that suggests the change. Okay, so conjunction is anything like and, but, things like that. So here we have then. Okay, and that's telling us the change because we have this one moment, then it changes into something else. Why does Heaney use such abrupt and blunt language when he says then she was dead? Okay, I'm going to leave that one kind of open to interpretation, open to you. Death is very final, as we know, and Heaney knows this himself. So maybe that's why it's quite abrupt and blunt, because it is the end and it's very final in this. And you know, it's the ultimate end to anything. It's the ultimate end to a relationship. So maybe that's why, but I'm going to leave that open for your kind of interpretation. Mood at this point in the poem, sad, perhaps, poignant, quite tender. You know, we have this lovely moment, he called her good and girl, and then she dies. So it's quite tender. Perhaps his mother was holding on for one last glimpse of her husband's soft side, and when she gets it, then she knows it's time to go, perhaps. So there is a tenderness and a very poignant moment here. Searching for a pulse beat was abandoned. Okay, so we're thinking here about searching and abandoned. Searching, so they're really hoping that, you know, they're wrong, that something's going to happen, something will change and it will come back. Abandoned suggests a sense of dismay, that they've given up, they've lost hope perhaps, but it's a very short moment of hopelessness, I would argue, whenever we go into the next few lines, okay? And we all knew one thing by being there, okay? So they are now united in this sad time, and what words suggest that we're united is we all knew. So we all, that we're together, all knew one thing by being there. Okay, this togetherness in this line of the family being united. The space we stood around had been emptied into us to keep. It penetrated clearances, it suddenly stood open. Okay, I talk about this in the annotations video in a lot of detail, so I don't want to go over it too much, so that you can watch that as well. What does the space we stood around have been emptied into us mean, and what language technique is used in this phrase? Okay, so the space we stood around, so this sort of atmosphere as such, there's an emptiness now in them because they have lost their mother, and there's a void in their lives, but the atmosphere of the room, the atmosphere of the moment is coming into them, and it's going to maybe hold them up. It gives them a little something to hold on to with the mother. We're thinking about the clearances here, and again thinking of clearances as being an open space of some sort. So although the death of the mother obviously leaves a void, Heaney refers to it more as a clearance, okay? And if you think of a wood or a forest that's been chopped down, it becomes a clearance. So something that's been opened up, and maybe there is potential, maybe there's hope that this can be developed in some kind of way, perhaps. Again, it's sort of open to interpretation, just like with the title. It penetrated clearances that suddenly stood open. We're thinking of the suddenly, so maybe this death came very quick. Maybe it's been a long process up to this point, and now that they've got to this point, they find themselves with this openness, this emptiness around them. But there is, I think, I would argue, maybe some sort of hope with the open. It's not empty, it's open. Okay, if it was empty, there's a real sadness there. Open suggests a little bit more hope that, yes, now it's open, but this openness can be filled with other things, okay, with other experiences. High cries were felt and a pure change happened. So thinking about a forest, whenever the trees are cut down, they are felled. So there's a bit of imagery here going on with this. High cries, so obviously we're getting a sense that the family are devastated and are obviously weeping for their lost mother. But I do think that there is hope with a pure change happened. Because yes, there is a change, okay, and we're thinking of our themes here with the themes of change, but it's pure, which is quite a nice adjective to use here, and it does give a sense of hope for the future. Okay, there are a few questions here on context, so that's kind of covered the poem itself. A few questions on context, but I want you to do a little bit of research yourself on the aspects of Heaney's life that are reflected in the poem. Okay, I've already said about his younger brother having passed away very young, so maybe that can come into this. Time or place in which it's written reflected in the poem. We're not really given a specific time or place as such. You know, we know we're at a deathbed. We don't know whether it's maybe in a hospital, in a house. We don't know when this kind of happened. So there's an openness there, perhaps. It makes it more relatable, I suppose, for other people to read the poem and to appreciate themselves who have maybe lost somebody that they love. Do you need to know anything about Heaney? Do you need to know about this woman? No, I don't think so. I think you could read this poem and appreciate it yourself, particularly if you're reading it with eyes of, you know, someone who has lost as well. Universal appeal, that's up to you to kind of suggest. I would argue that yes, it does, because it's quite open. The characters are nameless in it. It's he, her, and we. There's you, so you can relate to it. It's something that we will all experience at some point. You know, losing somebody. So I think it does have a universal appeal. And then how the poem links to relationships and change. Again, I'm going to leave that open to you to kind of work out yourselves. That takes us through this week's work. Okay, so you then have to answer those questions. Please annotate the poem. Okay, so there is a copy here. I've already said there's various different ways that you can do that, and I have a video of my own annotations on that. Some, not all. I've only done some to give you inspiration to start off with, but I don't want to give you everything. I want you to work for it as well. Okay, so that is this week's work. Please get in touch if you need any help or if you're still unsure of anything. Okay, get in touch at any time. I'm always here. Thanks.